Hi, I'm Mark Scott, author of On Us, talking about big ideas, little books for Hachette, Australia.
Well, Mark Scott, thank you so much for joining us. I know that now you're the Secretary of the New South Wales Department of Education, and you've had a distinguished record in public service, education and the media. I think initially you were a teacher and an education policy advisor, but since then you've had a long career in journalism, including editor-in-chief of the Fairfax papers and then managing director of the ABC from 2006 to 2016. So on Us, my first question really is, who's us anymore? Do you know who us is?
Well, I think when I was writing it, I think what I tried to tap into was the collective experience that we've all had, particularly as this media revolution, this technology revolution has been rolling out around us. And part of it was the shared experience that we've all had, but also what has happened to that collective self in an era of fragmentation as we all retreat into our own corners with our own screens, reading the content that we're choosing. Have we lost some of that collective benefit that came when we were a community together, reading the same things, watching the same things, talking about the same things?
And I presume you would suggest that we are the poorer, we're impoverished by that sense of tribalism and fragmentation and the lack of a kind of shared sense of community and civility and public space and public discourse?
I think the interesting discovery I made when I was writing the piece, I mean, you encouraged me to write the piece as you do, but I was thinking a lot as I wrote it, and I think the tension that I found was that I'd been so excited about new media and new technology, a great believer in all that was good that could be offered. And I think it was easier to see those benefits up front. It was harder to see the costs. And I think over the last decade, the costs have been more clear. And one of the costs has been the loss of that shared space. And sometimes you only appreciate things when they're gone. I don't think I really understood the benefit that came to us as a community when we were watching the same programs, reading the same newspapers, having the same experience, so that we could learn from each other, share from each other, and have a broader collective conversation in a way that it's much harder to do now.
So I always think, and I presume you felt the same way, that the ABC is the public square. I think you use that kind of language, that it is a place, a site, the national broadcaster with a charter that's important about the national interest and public good, and that was a place and continues to be a place where we share ideas and share a sense of who we are. Do you think that's correct? I think that would have been your aspiration at the ABC.
I think the ABC still plays that role, and it's almost more important than ever that it plays that role, given the fragmentation that's happened elsewhere in the media. But even if you come at it at a higher level, I think back in the day where there were only 3 or 4 or 5 television channels, we were all watching the same programs. A handful of newspapers were all reading the same papers. Now, there might be 10,000 hours of content available for you on your screen rather than a choice of 3 or 4. There's a chance that we all disappear into our own worlds and that those worlds are reinforcing worlds. And so we're not being exposed to different perspectives and different ideas. Our media was mass media. It's increasingly becoming narrow. But I still think the last great hope for the side is still the public broadcaster that can hold a national conversation and can be a nation having a conversation with itself.
But you contributed to the fragmentation in a way, all the kind of slicing and dicing of the audience by News 24, the Children's Channel, iView.
Yeah.
I guess, would you say, well, we were compelled to respond to audiences fragmenting and separating and wanting curated content specific that they could choose in their own time, to their own interests, that you had no choice but to do that?
I think in a way, the great risk for the ABC was that it would be the great public broadcaster of our parents' generation and didn't change the new reality. The new reality was that the audience was going to choose, and the audience was going to be liberated from sitting in front of the set or having the wireless. So you needed to take the content you were creating and get it in front of the audience where it was. And so I viewed very important to deliver that to phones and deliver that to tablets. If in fact there were going to be multi-channels on free-to-air television, that the ABC was there. And you know, I think some of those, you know, I don't have any regrets on the strategy, but I think the full impact is a little bit unknown. I think News 24 really brought the 24-hour news cycle vibrantly to Australia. Sky had been there before, but with Sky and News 24 together, the fact that politics always seems to be on, that our politicians are always on our screen reacting to each other in this tactical match through the day to win the news cycle, I think you can make an argument that it's been challenging for politics and challenging for public policy, but the ABC would have been weaker as a news brand if it wasn't there, and I still think that's there, but Four Corners is there also, and the ABC is still delivering for its audiences.
And there was management challenges in this, and it was, I think, probably fair to say it's actually in the 10 years or so that you spent at the ABC, the plethora of devices, the change from the iPad and the iPod and the, you know, the iPhone and Netflix and all that all comes during, you're inundated as a CEO and the organisation you lead, inundated by the devices that come at you. You've got to contend with them. But I think you used to quote when you were at the ABC that line from The Leopard, if we want things to stay the same, we'll have to change. So what did you want to preserve? Was it the civility and the community, the feeling of a shared set of ideas or discussions or debate in the public community? Is that what you wanted to preserve? Yeah,
there was a line I liked from an editorial in the Sydney Morning Herald which said, you'd still have an Australia without the ABC, but it wouldn't be this Australia. Part of Australian life and an indispensable part of the lives of millions of Australians each day. And so I think you wanted to preserve the ABC being a central part of the Australian story, explaining Australia to Australians, explaining the country to the city to the country, the big ideas being explored. And I think that sense of national conversation and that sense of national understanding was very, very important. And unless the ABC evolved to be where people were going to be, increasingly its audience would just get older and older, and it would be less relevant. And so I'm very proud of something like iView, for example, that was the real innovator in Australia when it came to catch-up television. And I think one of the interesting things in my time there was the ABC demonstrating it could be genuinely innovative as well as holding on to the grand traditions of the past.
And now you're head of the Department of Education New South Wales, and I think I read that means 2,200 schools, 800,000 students, 60,000 classrooms. You have to turn your mind, I'm sure, and you have turned your mind to the future of these students who are now in schools and what community means or what us will mean to that generation, the next generation. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the challenge is immense. I think we understand that we're preparing children for a vastly more complicated world, a world that's going to be transformed by globalisation, by technology and by climate change, and a world where many of the jobs that we know today are going to go and new jobs are going to be created. So one of the things that you have to do is to prepare them for a life of learning and a life of change, and so you need to give them the skills so they can learn, in a sense to help develop their character so they can be resilient, but also to equip them to be thoughtfully engaged with the society as it emerges. So if we're going to live in a society that's dominated by machine learning and artificial intelligence, what does it mean for a person to thoughtfully reflect on that power, those tools, and reflect on how those tools are going to change our society? So in a sense, we want to equip them to be resilient and successful, but to be contributors and thoughtful citizens. And so I think that's a great demand on our school and our school system, and vastly more complex than a challenge than we've faced in the past.
Because it's not just about teaching them to be good programmers, is it? You know, to be able to code, you know, and you know,
No, I had a conversation with the global head of Microsoft, and I asked him about this. I said, should we be teaching everyone to be programmers? And he said, well, of course, the machines are going to program themselves, but that understanding of computational thinking how a machine does that, and to understand the assumptions that underpin the algorithms, the ethical decision making that underpins the algorithms. These are going to be vital skills. And one of the things I reference in the book is that old line that if you're not paying, you're the product. I think one of the things I really want to work hard with schools on is to help students understand this technology. So I'm a little bit sceptical about blanket bans on technology at school, because fundamentally before school and after school, weekends, holidays, kids are going to have the devices in their hand. It's important you explain to kids and work with kids so they understand how addictive this technology is. The strong commercial interests that are drawing their attention, how their attention is being sold and exploited, how they can be manipulated by this technology, and so they can be thoughtful consumers. One of the challenges I think for us as educators and parents of this generation is that we're still learning all about this ourselves. This technology is still very, very new. That line, we teach best that which we most need to learn ourselves, that's the way it is with the technology too. So as parents and teachers are learning how to have mastery over the device, so we need to be helping kids to have mastery over the device as well.
It's mastery. It's also, this is it sounds like platitudes, but I don't think we're doing it right yet, and you know better than I do. But critical thinking, media literacy, a kind of cynicism in the next generation about their place in the supply chain. The fact that we're all the product so much of the time, right?
Absolutely.
And I don't know how you begin to.
But I think you need to start having those conversations, and partly it is explaining how the technology works, how the algorithms work, how the business models work, and then actually to get students to reflect on their own experience. Why is it that you find it very hard to put the phone down? Why are you curious and scratchy if you haven't looked at it for 15 minutes? To even look at the science of it, the science of addiction and brain chemistry, there's a lot of teaching that could go in to explaining the mastery of these devices. And then I think a lot of tools, critical thinking tools are certainly one, but even reflecting on mindfulness and how you actually get to a point of mastery over how your brain and mind works. All of these things, I think, are going to be new skills.
That you can have some control over it.
Absolutely
You're not a victim
right.
of their phone pinging all the time.
Yeah,
correct?
That's right. Yeah.
It's such an interesting challenge. It's really, I don't envy you that, but it's to imagine a future in which these students are engaged citizens seems to be paramount.
I sometimes say that the future is not an abstract concept for our teachers, it's present in the faces of the kids in the classrooms today. So a child who started school this year will finish school in the early 2030s, may not actually hit the workforce after further study till the late 2030s or 2040, and they'll work the vast majority of their lives in the second half of this century. So the challenge that we face working with children today will reap the benefit of in the second half of the century. So it's very real and very present now. It's not an abstract concept to us at all.
And we used to talk about the internet, I think this would be very last century, as the opportunity to democratize knowledge. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think, again, this is something that's evolving, isn't it? I think a decade ago that would have been idealistic. I think now you'd say, well, what is knowledge? I think knowledge will still be very important, but the ability to interrogate facts and work out what is fake news, what is real. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. They're not entitled to their own facts. So how do you test what is coming at you as being factual? How do you ascertain whether that is truthful or not truthful? I think this is going to be another vital skill that's important in the school system, and something that we need to be working on. I do think, interestingly, we've done a lot of work on the curriculum and the shape that the curriculum needs to be. And there'd be some who'd say, well, knowledge is generic, anyone can Google anything, that's not important. I think our work on it now would suggest that the ability to come to a deep knowledge on a subject matter is a vital part of schooling. To be able to mine a subject, to get into real depth and real understanding, is a foundation for developing skills in critical thinking and genuine collaboration skills and genuine communication skills. I mean, as you know, to really communicate something effectively, you need to know it really well. And so it's less of a view about a canon. These are the subjects that everybody needs to learn and master. But more of a sense of you really do need to be able to mine the depths of a subject to come to a substantive, deep understanding of it, to really develop those other associated skills as well.
It's interesting you talk about a canon, and because I was thinking while you were describing this deep knowledge, well, when I went to university, you know, in England, Reading University, I read English and history.
Yeah.
I read the, you know, great Western English and European canon.
Yeah.
I know the history and shape of European literature and English literature well. I have a sense, I know very little about most other things, but it gave me...
You can draw from that.
But it was narrow, but
Yeah.
it was deep. So there's a mix, there's a challenge, isn't it? Because you want a bit of breadth, you want to be able to contextualise your deep knowledge, understand the world that you inhabit. So it's a challenge between weighing up the depth and the breadth, isn't it?
I think that's right. But I think there's also that sense of having trained young people to go deep in an area, they will then have the skills that they can go deep in other areas. But if we're just grazing superficially across the top, almost the muscle that's required to go deep is not developed, and we need to keep developing that muscle, I think.
I love the idea of the muscle of deep knowledge. And someone said about you that you're hardwired for hope, which is a very nice attribute. And this was some time ago that you were described in that fashion. Are you still hardwired for hope?
I think so. You know, I think that's one of the reasons for working in education, that, you know, when the opportunity came pretty soon after I left the ABC to come and run one of the world's biggest education systems, I thought if you could do it well, the impact could be so profound, the multiplier on that through all the kids in our schools could be tremendous. So, yeah, I think I'm fundamentally optimistic. I think the book reflects a little bit, though. You can't be blinded by that optimism, and I think the lived experience of the decade of seeing new technology, signing up to it and believing in it, believing in its promises, but then seeing how it really worked in practice on individuals and on society, all that just makes you not just be a blind optimist, but to challenge yourself to ask quite tough questions about what's going on here. So I feel I'm an optimist, but I'm probably more of a realist than I was a decade ago.
Because you have a penchant on yourself for new things, don't you?
Yeah.
You are quite, I think they're called early adopters of toys, devices.
Yeah, I think I've always been interested and excited by the new and what was on offer and the potential. And yes, I was excited and curious as particularly all these new devices, all these new apps rolled out. And I'd go off to, you know, South by Southwest in Texas and just absorb what that tech industry was doing. And I, you know, believed in the revolution. And in a way, the impact of the revolution in its ability to impact lives everywhere, I don't think that's been understated. But the full consequences of the revolution, I think that's what I...
And that takes time, doesn't it? It's not clear, it's not evident at the beginning of how the iPhone, at the start, the iPhone is not clear what its ramifications are going to be.
And I think it's a layering effect too. You see, I think the device is one thing, but then, you know, because fundamentally it was a phone, right? It was a phone you could carry with you. Then it's the apps, then social media on top of that. And so it's a layering of the engineering, the ability to run applications, and then what those applications are, and that finally creates Facebook that people are spending 40 hours a week on, that can be then exploited by evil influencers and manipulate election results. Well, I don't think anyone could see the layering effect and the multiplier effect at the time when you started out. Not even Facebook could see all that.
Yes. I think you're right, and 1 in 2 Australians is on Facebook every day for 50 minutes, which is extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah. And when I was at the ABC, you know, we were always astonished by those numbers. I mean, you know, people like you and me, Louise, we're out there on Twitter. There are a lot, you know, there's a force on Twitter, and that's where a lot of in a sense, political debate and media debates carried on. But when you looked at the numbers, it was Facebook in vast numbers. And even at the department, you know, I started there a couple of years ago, they had about 200,000 followers on the department's Facebook page. And I said, I think it should be 1 million, shouldn't it? Well, it's 1 million now. And, you know, if we want to get a message out on coronavirus or something else, bang, you put it out.
It's Facebook.
You know, we had a situation the other day when we were closing a school, and we made that decision at 10:30 at night. Well, the following morning, not a single child turned up at that school. And I thought that was remarkable. I would have thought hundreds would have turned up. But whilst families were sleeping, the message is out. So everyone picks up their phone in the morning and they go, school is shut, and not a single child turned up.
So it's been transformational this decade,
yeah.
your decade. Which brings me full circle to the end of the world as we know it. You know, the demise of the print media, for example, and you have a section in your book on Us, which is about your mother-in-law's reading habits. And I wondered if we could conclude by you reading that homage to your mother-in-law.
Well, I'd love to, and this, I was working on the final draft of the book, and then I just witnessed this take place in front of me, and I thought the wisdom of the elders are still a lot to learn, so let me talk about my mother-in-law. I thought of these things while watching my mother-in-law when she stayed for a few days at our summer beach rental. She's partial to a bit of Netflix, but as with many an octogenarian, isn't too fussed by any of it, and is very happy to spend an afternoon with a book or have a night in front of the ABC. What astounded me was seeing her read the newspaper. The news I'd purchased, a paper, had been met with great joy. And whereas my reaction invariably was about how thin it was, this seemed to be no problem to her. It was enough. Where I flicked through it, noting the articles I'd seen online the day before, she picked it up, lay down on the lounge and read it. Seriously read it. Starting at the front page and working systematically through, laughing at the letters, reading bits out loud, and then, after an hour or so, complaining how little she'd got through and sternly warning me not to throw it out. I've turned into a newspaper flipper. I tear through those pages, reading little. Some weekends the newspapers remain unwrapped, and if I don't unwrap them, no one else in the family will. But I can't help but wonder if my mother-in-law has it right. That I don't need all those subscriptions and apps and news sources, that there is enough to read in the paper, even on a slow summer's morning. There'll be much there I would find interesting if I slowed down and took the time, rather than endlessly tapping the screen, refreshing it to look for the latest. After a lifetime of reading newspapers, the latest one still sparks joy in my mother-in-law. Not the news, but the experience, and that it is fresh every morning. I know that newspapers are fading away, but there is some wisdom in her deeply unfashionable attitude. The print editions will likely die with the generations that still love them, but I love the mindset that suggests for an hour I will find interest and engagement in these pages, and if I'm not always restless for more, this will be enough.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to your mother-in-law. Thank you for joining us to talk about On Us.
Thanks, Louise.